Well, thank you. Paul, the Edelsons, the Dillingers, the Richmonds have been so kind to me when I started working at the Historical Commission for the county. Randy, I took Randy's job. He graciously retired and handed it over to me. And I thought this would be a perfect venue to for Mali's coming out, Mali pictures coming out. This is something that I've been interested in for quite a long time. My neighbor and myself, Ann Garrison, I live in Allentown, by the way, if you haven't already figured that out. I'm a homeboy. Everything about Allentown, I would used to stop people in the street and say, "You ever hear about Allentown, New Jersey?" I never heard about it. But I tell them the history, and they thought I was a bit crazy, but you know, it helps. It helps in Allentown to be a bit crazy. My neighbor, Ann Garrison, was concerned about the development around the Allentown area. We're surrounded by Robbinsville, Upper Freehold. Upper Freehold is really great when it comes to preserving open space. Excuse me. Okay. And Trenton, of course, is not too far away. It's just about 10, 12 miles towards the river. And so we were getting quite a bit of development. 195 came in. That sort of destroyed the area, we think. It brought a lot of development. And so my neighbor, Ann Garrison, said that we should really do something. I was president of the Historical Society at that time, and she said, you know, if we could draw attention to Allentown as a unique historic location, then we maybe stem the tide of development. And yeah, okay, Ann, like how are we going to do that? So what we did is we started to research the legend of Mali Pitcher, of all things. And as we got deeper and deeper into it, we realized that we had a controversial subject on our hand, because we would go over to the battlefield, and there's some folks that believe that her real name was Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay. I don't necessarily doubt that, but you got to forget everything you've heard about Mali Pitcher. Has everyone heard about Mali Pitcher in this county? Of course you have. It's Monmouth County. And so Ann says, you know, let's do the research. I said, okay, I work at the state. I'll go to the library. I'll go to the archives. You help me with this. And what Ann would do is take the material that I would find, and she would type it up, and then she started to put it all in order. Well, what we found out is there was so much more that happened in Allentown during the Revolutionary War. It was the site of a mill, early mill, that was used before the Revolutionary War even began to provide relief to the Bostonians that were blockaded in Boston. Paul Revere rode down to Philadelphia before his more famous ride, and he asked the committee in Philadelphia for some help. And the committee, what they did is that they purchased the mill outright, and they milled the grain, and they collected money for the support of the blockade in Boston. And that was a big deal. And then they maintained the mill as not only a supply depot, but as their headquarters of a sort, and they would interrogate prisoners there. This is the Patriot cause. And they realized, because of the location of Allentown, so close to Trenton, so close to Monmouth County, which was at that time, excuse me, was at that time a Tory hotbed, that the Philadelphia or Pennsylvania folks knew that they had to keep Allentown safe. And they were able to do that through some influential families. So that's pretty much the background. And we put together a 100-page document about the Revolutionary War. And I would distribute it to people, and through that effort, we were able to preserve some space, open space around Allentown. But let me get into this program, because this is really an involved program, and you really got to stay with me on this one, okay? Because it's different. It's like nothing you've heard before. Okay, this is the Lutza painting in the possession of the Monmouth County Historical Association. It's actually the later version. I understand the first version. He had a scowl on his face, Washington, and the reproduction decided to change that. And here he almost looks angelic, you know, with his sword up to the sky, praying for some help. And he needed help that day. Okay, here's another image. I happen to have an original copy of this. It's a lithograph of Mali. I don't believe the person it's attributed to online is the right person, but that's just another local one. The traditional view of Mali at the cannon with the ramrod, taking the place of her husband down at the bottom there. It is a nice picture, though. I really enjoy it. And this is the most interesting. This is what bothered me the most after all these years studying the legend, if it's a legend, is that why would Washington why would, first of all, Nathaniel Greene, Washington's second well, he wasn't second in command at the time, but would become his second in command, be presenting Molly Pitcher to himself. And it just didn't seem right with the legend. I mean, the woman fired a cannon. Okay, Washington wouldn't necessarily be of the same class or ilk of a woman that fired a cannon. I mean, it just didn't make sense to me. So let me go ahead with this new Mali story. Okay, here it starts. It starts in 1876. Reverend Swain of the Allentown Presbyterian Church had written in his historical discourse, which the ministers were asked to do for all the individual churches to celebrate the centennial. Moreover, from among us, it is said, was the famous Molly Pitcher. She who at the Battle of Monmouth acted the role, and role is intentionally italics, of cannoneer in the place of her husband, or some other brave who had fallen beside his gun. She is reputed to have been the daughter of one John Hannah of Allentown, was of North of Ireland extraction, and had been for a time a servant in the family of the father of Captain James Bruere. They go on to say she was perhaps the wife of a soldier named John Mabon. And then it goes on, and it's pretty flowery after that. It really doesn't provide us with any more information. So this is in 1876. The source of that information is Sarah Stafford, or Sarah Smith Stafford. She was notorious. You see her here in Trenton, New Jersey. She was a real character. She carried the memory of the Revolutionary War forward into the 19th century. She had donated $10,000 to $15,000 to Governor Olden before the Civil War. She was robbed of a significant amount of money. This woman was a real character. The problem with Sarah is, though, the truth never stopped her from telling a good story. This is the flag. This is the famous flag. Some folks might remember it. It was displayed, the same flag that was displayed at the Twin Lights when the Pledge of Allegiance was first recited, legend has it. And this is a sword that was at Bunker Hill supposedly, and a musket that her descendant Smith from the Boston area had obtained. Problem with the flag, Smithsonian, not till 1930 were they able to determine it was a fake. It was a 12-star flag that she claimed flew on the Bonhomme Richard with John Paul Jones, and that her father, who was a volunteer lieutenant, dove into the North Sea, rescued the flag, and then brought it back and nailed it to the masthead. At that time, and that wasn't enough. At that time, they say someone slashed his shoulder with a cutlass, and he suffered the rest of his life. That was true. Here's the old man himself. He was our first squire. He was a teacher at the Allentown Academy, which was affiliated with the Presbyterian Church. James Barrard Stafford, quite an individual. Now this is what it gets really good, because the fake flag and the fake story, though, have some meaning to it. James Stafford was recognized by not John Paul Jones, but Commodore John Barry. He grew up with John Barry in Wexford, Ireland. And this is a letter of recommendation to Burling and Guyon in New York City, recommending Stafford for a position. And then it says, I don't have a pointer, sorry, but somewhere in there, it talks about his service. And then it says, at the request of a secret committee of Congress, Barry sent him with a message to Henry Lawrence, who was the president of the Continental Congress, and he was in the Tower of London as a prisoner. So this man went as a spy Barry drops him off in Ireland. He makes his way to the Tower of London, hands the letter to Lawrence, who's a prisoner, and it says, don't give up, don't negotiate, don't give the oath to the king, we'll get you out of there. So I think that's pretty amazing. Now, why didn't Sarah know about this? I suspect that the fact that the man was a spy and proud. You know, the society back then was different. People respected character, they respected honor, and if it had been found out that the gentleman was a spy, I think even in the time that in the early 19th century, it would have not been provided him in a good light. Back to Hannah. That was just sort of an aside to identify my source. Sarah Stafford went on to be quite an icon in Trenton. Rutherford B. Hayes, she became friendly with. Everyone believed her stories and gave her money. The government gave her money. It was just an incredible story. I'm going to probably write a story about her too someday. Okay, here's the Upper Freehold 1780 tax returns, and at the bottom, very bottom, it's good. It's a big screen. Is John Hannah. He had about 7 acres in Allentown. He had a house in the lot, and he had 2 cattle. And he was charged 24 pounds, 13 shillings and 2 pence for his taxes that year. He's a weaver, by the way. He's from North Ireland and most likely brought with the Rogers family, but that's a whole other story. This is the house where he had lived with his daughters. It's the right side of the house. This is 19 High Street. It's actually just up the street from where I live. And that 7 acres was most likely adjoining the 7 acres where my house currently is today. Now, here's Hannah's will. Hannah gives and bequests unto my daughter Mary Kavanaugh. Now remember they said Maban, but in a strange way, it could be Mahan, M-A-H-A. And if you write out Kavanaugh and Maban, I can see where they might have gotten that mixed up. To the daughter, 1 feather bed with a new striped tick, a bolster, 1 new sheet, a light-colored, there's something or other turned, bedstead and cord, also a new silk handkerchief. Now, it's suspicious that she seems to be getting things that the other daughters aren't getting. And then, lastly, he leaves a heifer. Now, remember, he only had 2 cattle. He leaves 1 cattle to the granddaughter, Nancy Kavanaugh. So we know that Mary Hannah had a child, and there was some tradition, and I hate to bring this up, but there was some tradition that Molly Pitcher was pregnant at the battle. Okay, now here's Kavanaugh. He's a member of the Continental Line. He's under Lieutenant Barton. Lieutenant Barton's notable for letters back to his father, Gilbert Barton, in Allentown when they were staying at Valley Forge. He shows up on a casualty list, but I suspect that's not necessarily because he was wounded or because he died. I suspect that's because he deserted in September of 1 year to return March of 1778, just before the Battle of Monmouth. Okay, keeps on going. Pulse of the People, New Jersey, 1763, 1789. New Jersey State Museum Bicentennial Catalog. Great book, fantastic book. Images of the possessions of New Jersey that New Jersey Historical Society and the State Museum and others partnered on. Now, this is what really got me going. There happened to be on the same page a picture of Mali, unattributed painting that in the possession of the old barracks, on the same page as the sword that was Captain James Bruer's sword. He was the local militia captain. It was said, remember, that she was a servant at a time in the household of the father of Captain James Bruer. Regrettably, the sword was loaned to Fort Monmouth years ago, and Monmouth County Historical Association hasn't seen it since. Melissa Ziobro and myself have made attempts to find its whereabouts, but have so far been not successful. If anybody knows where this sword is, it's got a lion's head on it, and it's really a wonderful artifact that should be returned to the County Historical Association. This is his grave in the Presbyterian Church of Captain James Bruere. I have text here. I'm not going to bore you with it, but it talks about his devotion to the cause as well as to his family. Okay, now the genealogy. And this is where it starts, the glue starts to piece it together. This is Peter Bruere, and then brother executor of Eleanor, sister of Isaac Price. This is the father of Captain James Bruere. The mothers of Price. So that maternal side of the family is related to the Bruere family. They're French Huguenots, by the way. There was another guy, old timers, ready? Malcolm Gilman. Does that ring a bell? Yeah, he wrote a book about Molly Pitcher too. And now I'm going to just take a little break now and tell you that I was chosen, you know, like take me. I was chosen to be a part of this Molly Pitcher group because a guy, FX, right, would call me up and say, in the middle of the night, well, in the evening, he'd call up and he'd be, you know, sheets to the wind, or whatever the term is, and he'd say, look, you have the legend of Molly Pitcher in your possession. You've got to work on it. I'm like, please. what are you talking about? And he would literally drive me crazy with this. But that sort of stuck in my head, and that's why I think I went further. This is the Price family. Isaac Price owned the fulling mill in town, which is right next to our grist mill. It's important because the mill eventually goes into the hands of the John and David Ray, who were wealthy merchants. They were the folks that worked with the Committee of Safety to transfer the ownership of the mill and put it in the hands of the brother, another Ray brother, and Ray will become very prominent during the Battle of Monmouth. In fact, some people call him the hero of the Battle of Monmouth. Here's the old mill in Allentown. If you've never been there, it's a really neat place. It's got a lot of history. This is an older version of the mill. This was built in 1855. Okay, now we're back to the Revolutionary War. These are Hessian maps I got from the West Jersey Society. It shows the British defenses around Allentown and Imlaystown. Well, people know the story. They evacuated Philadelphia and they marched across New Jersey. And the British came up, and I believe the British targeted certain areas, certain towns to do destruction. And Allentown had been mobilized. The mill had been used for the Patriot cause. And I think Imlaystown was also being used. They're rendering tar in Imlaystown. They got a tannery in Allentown in the back there that they're using. It's just a real Patriot hotbed, and I think they purposely, the route that Clinton took across New Jersey had to do with that. So this is my thesis. If Allentown is occupied, and Imlaystown is occupied by the entire 1st and 2nd Divisions of the British Army, and someone got intelligence to Washington, who is in Huntington County at this time, it would be something of note. It would be noteworthy. It would be valuable to Washington's strategy before the battle. Here's the Council of War. This is an image. I was fortunate to get the shading just right with my camera. And this is Council of War that was held in Hopewell on June 24th, 1778, the same day that Allentown and Imlaystown were occupied. They're all there. See the big man himself facing us? This is the Hunt House, known as, it's actually the Stout House, but Washington called it the Hunt House because it was in John Price Hunt's possession. You know where I'm going? Price, Bruere. This is a later version. Here's John Price Hunt's gravestone, who hosted Washington during that Council of War period. Here's Mary Dagworthy Hunt Bruere, This is she's a later generation, does not necessarily identify a relationship between the Bruere family and the Hunt family and the Price family, but that's what clued me in. Francis Baisley Lee, the guy he was from our area down there, Burlington County, Allentown area, and he really knew quite a lot of information. He did genealogy books as well as a history of New Jersey. And this is what clued me into a possible relationship between the Hunts and the Bruers. This is fantastic. I was able to find primary source documents. As a historian, I know the value. Before, all I had was an abstract on the Washington papers, and it gets better. Stay with me. General Washington family, they're paying Hunt for his stay, 10 pounds, 2 shillings, 6 pence. Received John Price Hunt. Colonel Harrison, aide-de-camp to Washington. Of all the slides, of all the documents, this is the one that is most valuable to me. This is where you've got to suspend disbelief and stay with me, because it says expenses paid. This is the receipt that he's getting reimbursed. Robert Henry Harrison is getting reimbursed for what he put out on behalf of the general to Hunt's house. You see at the top the 1026. Can everyone see that? And then you go down. You got Weatherall and Kingston. I know this because I was involved with the 225th anniversary with the Friends of the Monmouth Battlefield, where we led up to the road to Monmouth. It was known as a campaign where we had events in each of the towns, both the British and the Patriot towns, before the Battle of Monmouth, and that was back in 2003. To a servant, this servant at Mrs. Watkins, not Mrs. Watkins' servant girl, but yes.
Where did you find this?
Oh, online. But it wasn't there years ago. I went back and I was so surprised to find it. I would have put up the abstract from the Washington papers. But I was so grateful to find this. And $1. He's paying Mrs. Watkins' servant girl $1. Now, who's Mrs. Watkins? Now, this is sort of like the halftime. We could all, get up and stretch or something. But this is where the program takes another turn. Okay, I used to do a handout with 11 pages or so on one side, and I tell everybody, okay, turn the pages over, flip it over, and then the big question is, at this point, who is Mrs. Watkins? I just want to point one thing out here before I answer that question. July 19th, 2 sundry expenses. It's really hard to read. 2 ferrymen, etc. for punch at King's Ferry. This is well after the Battle of Monmouth. But he put out 9 pounds to not only cross the ferry, but it seems like they're having a party. And I'll get back to that. Just remember that slide, okay? There she is. This is from John E. Stillwell. Us in Monmouth County that work on history know how valuable the genealogies of John E. Stillwell are. He did not only his own family, but he did a 4-volume, actually probably 4 good volumes of individual family genealogies that are invaluable when studying Monmouth County families. But he pulled out all the stops with his own family genealogies, images and everything. So you got Lydia Stillwell, wife of John Watkins. I thought that was pretty good, especially with it appears to be the Dutch spelling with the Y, and then the I and S, the Americanized version. This is her mother, Mercy Sands. Mercy Sands was the second wife of Richard Stillwell, who occupied the Allen House in Shrewsbury. Mercy Sands' family came from Block Island, of all places, and then Long Island, and eventually met Richard Stillwell. First wife was a woman, I believe, by the name of Deborah Bowne, B-O-W-N-E. This is another sister They were known as the six, her daughters were known as the six beautiful sisters of the Shrewsburys, the Allen House, which wasn't called the Allen House at that time. Elizabeth Stilwell. Now, Lydia married a merchant, but most of the other sisters married officers, British officers of the highest rank from the French and Indian War. Her first husband was Captain Peter Wraxall. He was secretary for the Indians for the state of New York, and then secretary to William Johnson, who was the British liaison with the Indians. Her second husband, after Wraxall died during the French and Indian War, was General John Maunsell. Here's Peter Wraxall. Here's Maunsell. A little bit long in the tooth at that point, but it's an image of him nonetheless. Here's the Morris-Jumel Mansion. Now, Maunsell's estate was not too far from here. This is in Harlem Heights, Hamilton's in the same vicinity. His Grange was around the corner. This still exists. You could go visit this. It's really very, very interesting. Of course, Hamilton's hot now, and I guess tangentially, Burr is too. This is another sister. This is Mary. Now, I should go to my notes now, but I believe Mary married a Captain Thomas Clark, and Mary was the twin sister of Anne. Now, notice the bodice. Notice the embroidery. She's an adult. See? Flowers on the I guess her left. This is the sister. Flowers on the right. So they had matching gowns. I mean, these people were of the highest echelon. They were of high society at that time. They lived in New York. Their husbands were British officers. They left the country, most of them. They weren't staying at their estates. A lot of mayhem could go on, especially the sisters were patriotic. She married, this is the most important sister of all, she married Anne first Theodosius Bartow. Theodosius Bartow's gravesite is right here in Christ Church in Shrewsbury. His father was sent over to Westchester County to spread the gospel, being a good Episcopalian. He is right there in the center. He died young. He was in a carriage accident, and while Anne was pregnant. I want to come back to this. This is the Pell Bartow Mansion, another museum site you could visit. It's out in Pelham, New York. Just remember to come back to that, okay? Because then I'm going to go and sort of stretch it a little if we have time. Here's De Visme, another officer. This was, he then establishes a house in Hocus called the Hermitage. It's supposedly named after Rousseau's cottage, and he was known as a hermit, and legend says that's why it was called the Hermitage. I'm sorry. Here she is, Theodosia Bartow, who will eventually marry Marcus James Prevost. She's on the left. Theodosia, her daughter, his last name is Burr. She will eventually marry Aaron Burr. This image is, I guess, an embroidery on cloth. It's back in that book I had shown you before, The Pulse of the People, the museum catalog. I didn't know it was there. I only had a rough image of her. Rick, you showed me an image also. I think it might be the sister Lydia. Okay, here's this is Prevost, Augustine. He's a major general, but he's the brother of James or Jacques Marcus Prevost, who was a colonel. They fought down in the West Indies, And this gentleman led the 60th Regiment at the Siege of Havana during the French and Indian War. Okay. Theodosia Prevost, the wife of a British officer, is asking George Washington, who's staying with her aunt, Lydia Watkins, and writes to Washington, and Mrs. Prevost requests her best respects to His Excellency General Washington, bequeath the honor of his company. As she flatters herself, the accommodation will be more commodious than those to be procured in the neighborhood. Mrs. Prevost will be particularly happy to make her house agreeable to His Excellency and family. This is the Hermitage, Friday morning, 11 o'clock, primary source document. Again, just found recently, so I'm glad I delayed this talk for 6 months or so. There's the Hermitage, and it's not the clearest picture, but it was the best picture I could find of the Hermitage. It's very Gothic. The Rosencrantz owned it. They bought it from the estate of the Prevosts, and it was the location of Theodosia's, where Theodosia would hold court. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and Washington himself, who after the Battle of Monmouth took his entire senior staff to stay with her, the wife of a British officer. Yes?
Say again what town that's in?
Hocus, Bergen County. Okay, this is an explanation back to the receipt. Remember, $1 to the servant girl at Mrs. Watkins, not Mrs. Watkins' servant girl. Now, Washington had dinner, and Mrs. Watkins' daughters serenaded him, but must be the next morning or so, that's when the note was sent by Theodosia. Now, in here, I got a close-up of this, and it might not come out so well, but I did the best I could with the computer. It's dated the 14th of July. It's to cash. It's Mrs. Prevost's servants. Now they're paying for the servants at her household, but they're paying in hard currency. They're paying in pounds and shillings. That poor servant girl, who, if she was a regular servant girl in this combined household of aunts and nieces, would have been cheated out, I think, of getting $1. Washington paid the Patriots in dollars, which were quickly devaluing throughout the war. And yet he paid hard currency to the Prevost servants. I think that's an important point I'm trying to make. This is where it gets a little crazy, but the body of Zabritsky, who was a known loyalist in the area, which was purchased from the Aaron Burr, the Rosencrantz purchased the estate. The new owners, counting windows on the top floor from outside the home, noticed an extra set not accounted for. From within the house, upon further examination, a secret room was found. The possible remains of the loyalist Zabritsky, clothed in a Hessian captain's uniform and draped in an American battle flag. Now, that's a published source, 2005. Cipher, Code of Dishonor, blah, 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 blah. It's by Alan J. Clark, and it's the craziest book because he tries to claim that Aaron Burr was a spy on behalf of the British. I think the opposite. He was a spy. It's identified in all his records that he was a spy. He's working for the people that were doing spycraft, and that he was a spy for the Patriots. Then it goes on to say, the secret room proves the supposition that Theodore Prevost was involved in espionage and that her home was a haven for spies, Tories, and refugees from the Americans. This room probably had connections to secret passages within the home by which escape and also observation of its occupants could occur without discovery. A tunnel leading from the home still exists today. The reason why I was so surprised to find this published source is because I had heard from an individual who grew up in Hohokus the same story. I asked people in Hohokus, people I know, historians, and they said they never heard any such thing. Coincidence? I don't know. Here's the man himself, a Vetterline portrait. I'm not going to get into his life. I mean, it was complicated enough, except to say that he married Theodosia. He courted her also. This was a great love affair. I believe that I know from primary source documents that Washington, right after he stayed with Mrs. Prevost, he's asking Mr. or Aaron Burr to escort her back into New York City. Remember, they paid $9 for the punch at the Ferryman's. That's because they were there to gather intelligence, and they were juicing them up to get the tongues to be wagging so that the individuals will tell them what's going on. In fact, these women maintained constant contact with Washington throughout the war. They're asking Washington for passes, and Washington's granting passes, or telling her to go through the channels through Governor Livingston, whatever. They had access to Washington at any given time. Here's Aaron Burr's watch. This is the only image I had previously of Theodosia on the left, and that's Theodosia Bartow, and that's Theodosia Burr on the right, who sadly was lost at sea. She had married the governor of South Carolina, Joseph Alston, and when she was returning back to New York, the ship was lost at sea. Okay, what is this? This is Richmond Hill. I've got notes here, but I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Richmond Hill was part of Trinity Church. It was called the King's Farm. It was leased for 99 years. It's sort of where Alan Clark got his idea of his thesis is that Burr was a spy for the British, and that later, through his legal dealings, was able to return most of the wealth. Like, okay, yeah, someone stole our wealth. Sound familiar? Most of the wealth in America, or New York City in particular, back to the British. This later became Burr sold this. Actually, it's where Theodosia passed away. Now, it was the house of Abraham Mortier. Mortier was the paymaster for the British Army during the French and Indian War. That's a really high position. There's another name, and I don't know if I want to bring this up now. Let me see how far along I am. Okay. Well, this is where Theodosia is buried, and I could always go back. Theodosia is 1795 or so. Burr buys the house in 94, and I believe he brings her back there. These people were true romantics. I think they relived their exploits during the Revolutionary War throughout their remaining life. And then he bought a house. He bought a house up in Harlem. He then buys her this house, Mortier's house, and no, that's the canon. Let me tell you this now, though. This house. Anybody ever hear the story to Poison Washington in 1776? Okay, it's a great story. It's about the first individual who was hung for treason in this country. His name was Thomas Hickey. He was one of his I think he was a sergeant of the Life Guard. There was a plot to take over New York when Washington, after the unsuccessful Battle of Long Island, and Washington moved back to Manhattan, set up his headquarters in this house. And the story goes, and there's a lot of history about this, so I don't think it's just something out of thin air, but the apocryphal story may be. It said that there was a plot, and Hickey was involved in some sort of scheme with Lord Tryon, who was the mayor of New York, and other folks. They were going to close off Kingsbridge. They were going to blockade New York. They were going to finally get this devil, Washington, and it said that they poisoned his peas. And Washington, this is a great story. Whether it's true or not, it's a great story. Calls the sergeant of his guard in, and he's got the peas in front of him. And he knows the story, and it's said that Mortier's daughter, or actually it was Fonce's, they claim it was Fonce's daughter, but I believe it was possibly someone in Mortier's household. Could have been Theodosia, could have been one of her sisters. I don't know, but there's a connection there. It says, should I eat the peas? And the man breaks out into a cold sweat and instantly put under guard. And Washington takes the peas and throws them out the open window. You know where this is going, right? The chickens in the backyard eat the peas and instantly die. So that's Richmond Hill, that's it. Okay, what about the cannon? Forgot all about the cannon, right? Where did that come from? Well, again, my thesis is, if she was a spy and Washington accepted the intelligence that she provided to him, whether it be a map or something that he needed to determine what would be the best way to his military strategy, that he would have taken her and kept her safe. I believe that he took that woman, whether it's Mary Hannah or someone, and took her to Watkins and put her in the possession of Watkins for her own safety. I believe she might have been at the battlefield. Whether she was in Englishtown or close to the battle is another story. But there was a legend. This is a DAR chapter, is named after the Stillwell sisters. Down in Cape May, Beasley's Point. It's down in Cape May. It was a main depot for the Army. It was necessary to keep the river safe so that they wouldn't go up the river and attack the privateer bases. And Rebecca Stillwell was home alone. Well, Rebecca Stillwell was her maiden name. She married James Willett. He was a militia captain. It's said that the cannon was primed, and her and her children, seeing a British landing party heading towards the base there, that they fired the cannon to ward off the British, and that not only that, but her sister was married to Captain Moses Griffin. Moses Griffin is a privateer. He was captured. Actually, he was just the fact that he was a privateer. He shows up in Allentown in courts of admiralty cases, which were quite a few were held in Allentown at the time. And this happens the fall before the Battle of Monmouth. Moses Griffin is captured, and his wife, the sister of Rebecca, Sarah, again is Stillwell's. It's just ironic. Go to Washington. She makes her way up to Washington in North Jersey, and she was allowed to exchange. He was given a British officer to exchange for her husband. This is the house where they were in Cape May, and that's the end of my long story. Okay, pretty good. 8, 10 or so. I'm sure you got plenty of questions, and we could go back over the slides if you want. Paul. What happened to Molly Pitcher? Okay, guess what, guys? This is what I expected. This is why I haven't written this up. It's not your Molly. It's a different Molly. It's a servant girl. It's the tradition that was left in Allentown by Sarah Smith Stafford, that she was at a time a servant girl in the household of the captain of James Boyer. It didn't make any sense to us until we put together the genealogy with the Price family and the Bruere family. And they're the same households. And if this servant girl was able to travel from Allentown to Hopewell, now it's espionage. Its history is dependent upon the sources you have available. This is a tangled web that's woven with the cloth, the welt and the weave is the Stillwell family. The Stillwell family bleeds throughout here. There's such a part of our own history. I guess it only makes sense in my mind, but that's why I came here, because everyone else that hears it, I know, and they don't accept it. Yes, sir.
Didn't you say that the story starts, the claim that your Molly is the Molly from the Stafford woman who by your own admission is unreliable and didn't let a good story get in the way of the facts?
That's right, Randy, and that's why it's taken me so long to come forward with this story, because I had no confidence in her. None whatsoever. But when I realized that she told other stories, that I was able to collaborate, a British officer who was shot on a bridge in Allentown, and other items that I said, wait a minute, if you circle her stories, there's kernels of truth in there, and you actually have to extract them out to get to the bottom of the story. This story has been with me so long, I put it aside before I went back to graduate school. I went to graduate school to do this, and it wasn't until I had that confidence to say, wait a minute, there's a connection here. And then the further I delved into it, I had no idea Mrs. Watkins was going to end up as part of Theodosia's household. I had no idea it was a possible location for spies. It's a rich story. I got a lot of sources, but that's why I came here. I literally came here, and I didn't preface it with that. Maybe I should have. And I said, well, if I could sell to you guys, I have something. If I can't, I give it up. That's all. Nothing personal. I don't even know you.
So John, let me see if I have this right. So was John Hanna at the Battle of Monmouth?
No, you Kavanaugh. You mean Kavanaugh?
Right. He was in the Continental Line.
All I know is he's on a muster roll in March of 778. Right. There's nothing about him after the battle.
The battle's 2 months later.
Right.
So he's probably there.
Right.
And at that point, have you established that he's married to Mary?
Well, at some point, right, he might have married her after the battle. Right.
Okay, so how do we get her to the battle with him?
No, you guys, really, you can't shed this. You've been culturally brainwashed in regards to Mali picture. You're really not getting, and I understand. I didn't get it either. I told you I had to go to graduate school to actually try to understand
So
this.
she wasn't there, based on what you're saying.
I said she was there. Let me back it way. Guys you trust, right? Mark Lender and Gary Stone, you trust them? You read the book? I read the book. Guess what? Two of the 4 regiments at the Battle of Monmouth were led by gentlemen from Allentown. One was David Ray, who I referred to before as the hero of the battle, because the battle was fought on his family's property. Washington didn't know where the heck he was. And Ray was the one who sighted the cannons and told them the whole terrain and carried the day. And he's known as even in their book, Fatal Sunday. And the other guy you might have heard of is the signer of the U.S. Constitution, Lieutenant Colonel David Brearley. So the 2nd and the 4th regiments were commanded by these gentlemen. They were Allentonians. They were in the wing of Greene. Greene would have known them. Again, servant girls, people like that don't normally get any attention. Why the painting? Why all the tradition? Why the notoriety? And why couldn't we in all these years, and Sam Stell Smith and James S. Brown and all those people worked on this. They knocked themselves out. I don't care. I don't need to make a living with this thing. I just want to get off my chest. And I'll argue this all night because that's what I'm here for. Yes, ma'am.
So you're saying that because espionage was a disgraceful thing, the identity of this, what you call the Mali pictures being hidden?
No, not disgraceful. It was espionage. In other words,
it's not acknowledged by the government, you're saying.
Yes.
It's never, because you don't want to reveal basically what's involved with espionage. So it's a cover-up is what you're saying. Is the Mali picture...
I'm telling you that James Baird Stafford and the people that he served with that were in Allentown and that he would share stories with, that this woman had heard. She heard these stories. There was quite a few gentlemen that were officers that then settled in Allentown. She heard these stories. She'd get them mixed up, but people that were listening to her never realized that. She was able to sell that flag, and her whole and the rest of her family took that flag and those artifacts. When she died, it was 101 artifacts in her possession. And everybody, I don't know how many are real, how many are fake. I got to go to Rutherford B. Hayes Museum in Ohio to determine that. I mean, the woman is a true enigma. But that's essentially the thesis, is that this little bit of kernel truth. Let me tell you a good one. I was able to convince Ray Raphael. Ray Raphael is the biggest skeptic in my field, Revolutionary War study. He wrote the book about the Founding Fathers, the bestsellers. You could pick it up. And in it, he says there's a chapter about Mali. He says, okay, there's so many loose holes. Swiss cheese. Mali's like Swiss cheese. You can't pin down anything with it. After I shared my former program, I used to do a simpler program about this with him. At least he gave me a nod when he updated his 10th anniversary edition of that book, and he put a footnote in and said, you know, it's a shame that back in 1876, when Reverend Swain wrote that discourse, that the folks in Allentown didn't study it further and delve into it, because we might know today the true identity of Mali Pitcher. Now, he said that after saying 10 years earlier that there's no way anybody will ever figure this out. So at least he gave me that benefit of the doubt. Yes, sir.
There are other camp followers that went by the same moniker?
Oh, there's so many. No, Mali Pitcher, yeah, that's all that old tradition, right. There's Margaret Corbin is one of them. She was actually wounded in the shoulder at Fort Washington. That's well documented. She's the one that's buried up at West Point. There's the Mary Ludwig, I don't say Ludwig, but the Mary Hayes Macaulay woman in Carlisle. She was Irish, interestingly enough, or she married Irishmen, and yet the Germans still believe that she was Ludwig, based upon something that Sam Stell Smith back in the 70s had shot holes in. I didn't preface it with David Martin and myself and others worked very hard on a source book in 2003. It's about, you know, it's a nice tome about all the different sources and references to Mali Pitcher. He covers all that, and Mary Hannah's in there too.
My question.
Yeah, Paul.
Am I taking away from this that really Mali Pitcher was just basically a legend?
No. I'm sorry. I'll have an emotional breakdown. No, Paul. Paul, the story is that we cannot learn, we'll never know the true story because we're not there, right? Okay. But that's the last thing I want you to think. Because, please.
I'm a slow learner.
Let me try. Let me just end it with a coda, okay? Remember the Mortier house?
Yeah.
Okay, he was the paymaster of French and Indian War. Guess who was the commissary of recruits? Person that had to make sure that when the paymaster, Mortier, paid them, that they had the numbers right and they were paying the right people. His name was James Pitcher. That takes it, you know, somewhere else too. Then this is really crazy, and I didn't show any slides because I'm just telling you what I have evidence of. Novels sometimes, especially 19th century novels, give hints of truth. Mrs. Watkins appears in one of those novels. Burr there's a lot of novels written about Burr and his exploits. Mrs. Watkins, it's a novel, and it says, and it said that there was a woman who saved Washington's life, and that's that story about the poison peas. I got carried away there with that. And it said that, and when they asked her name, she said it was Peggy Mortimer, but she's also known as Mrs. Watkins, and that she claimed her uncle was the commissary in the British Army during the French and Indian War. Now, I know it's fiction, but the preceding that chapter, the gentleman throughout the novel literally takes like a third-person approach and says, you know, this part of this novel is true. And he tells that story about the poison peas and this woman who claimed that her uncle was the commissary of recruits. And I think that's possibly where the Pitcher name might have come from. Again, it's a lot of possibilities, but history's not easy, especially if you practice it. Yeah, right.
When Paul and I were in school together, I was the row behind him, so I was even slower. But let me see if I got this right. Your premise is that Mary Hannah is likely the source of the Mali Pitcher stories.
Yes.
And that the rest, Ludwig Hayes woman and all the other, was a conflation that happened over the years.
No, they were real people too.
Yeah, but I mean, they got conflated into the Mali Pitcher legend.
Yeah, because it benefited them. They were probably more of the ilk like Sarah Stafford, who was willing to take advantage of the system.
She's the root of a lot of the legend, you think, Stafford?
Stafford is a separate story. Oh yeah, she not all the story. I said she gives us the Mary Hannah story. She gives us the Mary, but you know what? Everything else, she's at least had access to the memory. She had her father's stories. Everybody else pops up, in the 1830s or so, or getting stories from Washington's descendants, and they're making things up. We're not. I don't know. I really don't. I'm just putting it out there. Good. This is great. I knew you guys. This is why I came here. I knew you'd run me through the mill and really try to understand and give me the benefit of the doubt. It's not an easy story to tell. It really isn't. And I'm not a storyteller. So maybe I'll write it and see if anybody buys it. Yes, sir.
What's the earliest that you know of recorded mention of the Mali picture story / legend / whatever it is?
Well, the name is actually Gary Zareski found an account. We have it a little later, but he found an account in 1830 where it appears in a newspaper account in Washington, Pennsylvania.
About Mali picture of Monmouth.
About the name, right.
And the woman, what's her name again? Not you. Who's the woman with the flag?
Oh, Stafford, Sarah Stafford, yeah.
And was she around in the 1830s also?
No, she was born around the turn of that century, right,
So
in the early 1800s. But her father was.
Okay, so is it possible that, and we've seen this time and time again in American history, people trying to make money on the past. We all kind of do it, right? Is it possible that that story was, along with the flag, was in order to build up some type of thing to?
Now, that's something. That's really something about Sarah Stafford. I think she was sincere because she thought she was telling the true story. But I think over the years, it sort of got mixed up in her mind. But I don't think she ever really knew the true story. Again, her father was not one to speak. He was very old school. They said he wore the breeches, the overcoat, and tied his hair in a queue, and he was like the remnant of that time period. Yeah, Lois.
So can we be proud of Molly Pitcher of Monmouth County, or can we just think she's sort of like Santa Claus, a nice legend?
I would be proud.
Okay.
And I'm especially proud because she's from Allentown. Randy's not laughing. He never laughs at my jokes. That's all right. Yes, ma'am.
There are records of Molly McCollum, right? She has records. She was a widow. She had widow's.
Oh yeah, I know all about that.
Stories
Yeah.
herself, right?
Excuse me?
She told stories herself.
No, I don't think she really did say that. I think
She called herself though.
everybody sort of just gleaned onto her. Yeah,
Like you said, so
she might have been taking advantage of it too. Yeah.
Right. But you don't think that I want to know what
Well,
Martin says about everything.
If Sarah Stafford was able to fool everyone to give her mother and everyone else a pension, her father deserved it, by the way, but other people were getting it too. In fact, she actually worked on behalf of families in Trenton. Really sincere story about that woman. I don't want to.
have to document a lot to get.
Yeah,
it wasn't easy, right?
Exactly. It's very difficult. The interesting thing about the woman in Carlisle, though, is that she got it for her own service, not as a widow.
Right.
It said it was for her own service.
At the Battle of Monmouth, right? Or is it
Well, no, it didn't say anything. No, it didn't get any detail.
no
No,
regiment? There's nothing.
no, nothing.
Okay, just
Very weak. Yes, Randy.
Pitcher is an actual surname. I'm trying to research a Stacy Pitcher. Could there have been anyone in the Revolution at the battle that had the actual name of Pitcher?
Oh, quite a few. In fact, I went out and purchased a genealogy of the Pitcher family for over $100. My wife says, "You're crazy," and I said, "I'll get to the bottom of this." I've done different versions of this before graduate school. Relying on that. Abner Pitcher was a gentleman in particular who was also in the lifeguard. Abner Pitcher. A lot of these folks are from New England. The other story is there are pitchers in Trenton in the early part of the 19th century that owned a tavern. So at one point I'm thinking, well, maybe this was stories they would spread and the legislators picked up on it and thought it was a good story and then started spread around. But there's pitchers all over the place.
So could Molly have actually been a pitcher?
That was one theory of mine. That's right. But it didn't make sense when every time I go back to this, it comes back to itself. John Jacob Astor, he he eventually makes money off that Richmond Hill property. And John Jacob Astor's hero of Washington Irving's Astoria, the true gentleman who was the explorer who went out west to Oregon by land, was the son of John Price Hunt. His name was Wilson Price Hunt. So I'm just telling you, this story is rich. I'll write it as a novel because it's such a good story. I mean, really. And that's why I'm here. Is it going to be a history that people are going to buy? Or is it going to be a novel that might be a bestseller? I'll write it up anyway.
Probably so.
Well, I don't know. But I'm just glad to get it off my chest.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm going with it as a Mali picture. I'd like to thank John. He's done, the work that when I was in college I didn't really do. He's done the tremendous research and everything like that, and then people like me get to read the book at the end with everything all done. So congratulations
Oh, thank you.
on your research.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Means a lot to me. Okay, great, guys.